Hello, and welcome to Moving Iron Podcast number 64. On this episode, Gina and Narjes and I are going to sit down and discuss basically our reconditioning process and how that works and what that looks like and how that helps us sell equipment. So, Gina, welcome to the show.
Thanks.
All right. So, kind of give a brief synopsis of how our process works. Our sales guys enter our information into one centralized location that comes to either me or Gina, either one of us, depending on who's on that day, and we go through the evaluation process of the piece of equipment, make sure the right information is in the right spot, double check serial numbers, those kind of things, and then once it gets booked in, what we do then is we start a reconditioning process when it hits the lot. And kind of a brief rundown of what that is: we set the reconditioning process or the reconditioning budget and during the evaluation process. And then what we try to do with that is maintain as close as we can without going over it and basically fixing what we have to fix. So, you know, our shops have the ability to, when it first hits the lot, to change the engine oil, wash it, and also inspect it. And once it gets inspected, that inspection is uploaded into our system, and then I get an email about approving what those processes look like. So, kind of at a bare minimum, we break things down into an A or a B or a C, and those A, B's, and C's. You know, A's being need attention right now, B's are there's still some life left in it, and C's are a cosmetic thing. You know, mirrors broke, glasses broke, that kind of stuff, and we make decisions based on that. So for the most part, all the A's get fixed that we can afford, and the B's come second, and the C's obviously are third. So, Gina, kind of, when you start looking out there and you look at our inventory, what do you see? How do you think that helps us sell equipment?
So basically, it makes that we have like a consistent policy across the board. So when a sales guy goes to sell that piece of equipment, he can already expect that, you know, he can sell that piece of equipment and it'll go to the field. He's not going to have to worry about what condition or what needs to be done before he can send that to the field himself. So that's kind of why we've put this process in place, so that way then any of our sales guys, they can sell it and know that that machine will run in the field or that tractor will run in the field you know, that day. And a lot of times too, like as far as, you know, sometimes when we're trading in a piece of equipment, there are some things that cost a lot of money to fix and recondition, and nobody probably knows that better than you and I, people that are looking at every single day. You know, our sales guys, they're pretty good at talking to their service department and their parts department, but a lot of times there's things that you and I know or noticed or have noticed that, you know, a combine with 5,000, or not 5,000 hours on it, but a combine with, you know, 1,000 hours on it, you and I already kind of have that pinpointed exactly what's going to need reconditioned at that point with normal wear.
Right.
So,
and that's the biggest thing too, is when you understand what that reconditioning process is and sticking to it. Because there's nothing that can be more catastrophic to the piece of machinery than over reconditioning it. You know, I can give you example after example of machinery that we have either written down or we have, you know, taken to auction or something like that that's gotten aged. That the reason that it got to the point where it's at is we had something catastrophic happen that we didn't account for during the evaluation process. Mm-hmm. Like to your point with the combine, 1,000 hours on it. You know, to me, based on those machinery that out there, you know, there's a certain amount of reconditioning costs that you have to account for when you start looking at that. So my rule of thumb has always been $100 per every 1,000 separator hours, right? So in that particular case, I'm going to account for about $10,000, and that $10,000 is going to take care of the majority of the major things. Now, when I say that, I want the inspection to be very thorough. I want it to be very, you know, very accurate. We have two different kinds of inspections. You know, and one is what I call our sales inspection, which basically hits the highlights of the machine. It's not the nuts and bolts, you know, of the overall process, but it's more of a, you know, we're going to hit the highlights of the components and what those components are. We'll then go through and make sure that we have everything connected the way it should be. what I like about that is when the customer sits down and we say, all right, Mr. Customer, we have $10,000 that we're going to spend on this machine. How would you like to spend that? Here's the inspection. So we're looking at the A's, and all the A's are going to be whatever, $7,500 or $8,000 or 10 grand or 12 grand or whatever that might be. It really helps the sales guy go through that process of, you know, fitting that machine to the customer's needs. So when you talk to our sales guys, what kind of information are they giving to you about those kind of topics?
Yeah, so it's our sales guys. They definitely like to have that power to be able to make that decision, because they know their customer best, and they know how many hours they're going to be putting on it in that next year. So if it's something that sales guy, he knows, hey, Farmer Joe is only going to put 200 hours on it this wheat season, and it's going to run this season for him, and then he can bring it back in, and we can decide in a winter service inspection program. Then we can decide to repair some of the C's or the B's that weren't necessarily crucial to having that done right off the gate.
Right.
And customers appreciate that too. They appreciate the honesty, and they appreciate the salesman really understanding and knowing that piece of machinery too.
Right. It's that transparency too, that guys see that, and they kind of step back for a minute and they say, we're telling you, laying it out as it is. We're going to tell you that this might be whatever the X number of dollars it is to get that machine to fix the entire work order that they've inspected out. But of that X number of dollars, this percentage over here, this dollar amount over here is what our trained professional technicians are saying that it really needs to get to guarantee that it won't break down through the season. Now, you can't really guarantee that it's not going to break down because new machines break down, but it's that sense that the customer and the sales guy both had a play, and how that machine was going to walk off our lot.
Yep.
So you start looking at various pieces of equipment. There are some pieces that I think guys may overlook when you start looking at what it takes to actually recondition them. And earlier today we were talking about corn heads. That's a machine that if you're not careful about what you're looking at, it could really sink you in a hurry, because it is expensive to recondition a corn head.
It is. It definitely adds up really quickly, and not just the parts, but the labor involved too. And there's a lot. I consider air seeders in that factor too. If it needs new seed discs and boots, that's pretty significant cost.
Right.
And the dealer knows that too, but it's good for the customer to know that, so they can weigh their thought process as to what is going to be best to continue in their operation. Is it going to be better for them to spend the money and fully recondition their machine and run it a few more years, or are you better off trading it for something different that is in usable condition, and letting the dealer take that cost of reconditioning that unit?
Right. Yeah, I mean, it really comes down to what's best for the customer when I start looking at reconditioning costs. I talk to the guys in the shop, and there's probably some shop guys that are going to listen to this and say that you're nuts if you think we're going to do that. But if you really start thinking about what's best for the customer, is sinking $30,000 in a $100,000 combine the right thing to do? Is spending $15,000 or $16,000 on a $25,000 corn head or $30,000 corn head, is that the right thing to do? And the answer is no, because the customer cannot recoup those costs. You might have increased the value of it to some extent, but you're not going to get the full extent of what you put into it, right? You made it usable again. So you took something that couldn't go to, if you deck plates, for example, on a corn head. If your deck plates aren't working and you don't have good deck plates, you can't use the head, right? So if you place a deck plates, you haven't increased the value of the machine by that much. You've made it usable. So that's one thing that I think a lot of customers need to have that conversation with their sales guy more than anything about. Okay, I'm looking at spending a pretty good chunk of change here. You all right?
I think so.
You're getting ready to spend a pretty good chunk of change on you spend $30,000 in a combine. That's that's a pretty good down payment when you start looking at it's 10% down on a $300,000 combine. I'm not saying that you do that, but you start looking at how you're going to better your situation and what you're going to do, and does that necessarily better your situation? It really depends on your situation as a farmer.
Yep.
Are you looking to maybe you're about to retire, so you're just going to fix this one and that's going to be it, or maybe you are going to you're looking at how your cash flow is going to work out, so you've got a $30,000 maybe a $20,000-$30,000 shop bill, and maybe you still have a $20,000 or $30,000 or $40,000 payment to pay. How does that affect your cash flow? It's a lot of questions that I think maybe are overlooked in a kind of in the economy that we're in right now.
Yeah, I would totally agree. I don't know how many conversations I've had with a sales guy where they're looking at trading a customer out of a piece of equipment, and they're like, well, this guy just spent X amount of dollars in the shop last winter, and it's really only actually worth this, and so I think maybe, and some guys, it's probably in their best interest not to trade that piece off and to continue running it.
Right.
But I think too, like to your point, it's good to have that conversation with the customer before they do sink themselves into that unit and they're stuck.
Right.
But on the opposite side of that, I think right now, and we've kind of talked about this before with planners, like right now the trend is with planners, there's a lot of guys that are retrofitting and upgrading a lot of parts and putting a lot of parts and labor into their planner to make an older planner run like a new one.
Right.
So it really depends on that piece of equipment as to what the right or wrong answer is to do.
Yeah. So the planner thing, I do think there's probably some level of, the stuff that you put on there, whether it's a John Deere retro kit or a precision kit or whatever that you're putting on there, there is a lot of value that gets added to that. Especially if you find the guy who wants that. Some of these new planners now, they're $250,000, $300,000 planners. I mean, brand new. If you can do that same thing with an older used one and turn this $40,000 planner, and you might spend that again to make it be the full thing. You have $80,000 to $100,000 into a planner that's going to do the same thing for the most part. Do the exact same thing that newer planner is. So that is one of those things where, again, you got to find a customer that wants that on the secondary marketplace. But more than likely, the guy that does that to that planner is planning on using that planner for a few years.
Yep.
It's not going to be a one and done type deal.
Exactly.
What are some other machinery out there that you think that maybe get overlooked a lot when you start looking at maybe some real reconditioning holes you can fall in?
I really think the hay equipment is definitely one that you can go down a hole in. I've looked at pictures of mocos or swathers, and you look at them in a picture that you're sent from your sales guy, and you're like, oh, that doesn't look too bad, and yeah, I think this will be okay, and we'll kind of plan for this, and then it gets on the lot, and you're like, whoa, that was not what I was expecting.
Right.
So it's really easy to get caught up in the wrong value, I guess, and that's where I lean on my sales guys a lot and talk to them about it and say, really, truly, what did you see when you looked at at the turtles and the knives and all that kind of stuff, because it does make a big deal. And the same thing with a pickup on a baler. There's a lot of things that you can do to make it run, and then there's times when the whole pickup needs to be rebuilt, and that can be a pretty significant cost when you're talking about a $20,000 baler. Right.
You start looking at spending $5,000 on a pickup, to completely rebuild one. There again, is that the right move for that customer at that time? If it's a paid-for baler and he doesn't want to mess with anything else, he just wants to spend his $5,000 and run it one more season. I would say that's probably not. I'm not going to sit there and tell someone what they can or can't do, but that's a conversation that you really need to start having with your sales guy, and your sales guy needs to be having with you at the beginning. If you're saying like, well, I'm going to take my head or my baler in, to get it rebuilt or whatever. We've got 25,000 bells on us, and we're going to rebuild the pickup on it now. It's probably time to trade it. Because then you start looking at some other significant things that you could have come into place and do all that stuff. So there's a lot of, I think a lot of planning that needs to take place when you start looking at that.
Yeah, I would agree 100%.
Yeah.
Or two, having that conversation like on a header or on a swath or a moco or something like that. I recently ran across a customer who nobody had ever told him that you could flip those knives around and run the other side.
Yep.
So they were coming in and running through knives, and then finally somebody asked them about it, and making sure that your customers fully understand the use that they can get out of all their parts too, I think is a big deal.
Yeah.
But it just goes back to encompassing what is best for your customer.
Because there are a lot of wear parts that you can flip or turn upside down or whatever it is that you need to do and extend that life twice as long. A lot of combine parts are that way. A lot of head parts are that way. A lot of baler parts, those kind of things.
Yep.
Not baler parts, swather parts. There's a lot of things there that you can reuse and just keep it going. So I think it's just important that everybody just think about that reconditioning thing, what it is. Especially four-wheel drive is another good example of that. So you have a pivot point, and then you've got two sets of final drives, and if you're not careful, depending on where it's at hour-wise, you could have some significant costs in just servicing the machine. Not necessarily fixing anything, but just the overall service of the unit.
Yep.
And that's something I think is really probably overlooked when you do that. What it costs to service a combine now. What's it cost to service a four-wheel drive? You're talking like 1,000 hours, do a 1,000-hour service or a 1,250-hour service, 1,500-hour service on something. It's expensive. Just some fluids alone. I mean, these things hold gallons of oil and gallons of hydraulic fluids and stuff. So it takes a lot to service that stuff up. So I would just say that when you're thinking about your equipment and your sales process, make sure that you're really on top of what your reconditioning is.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those things that if nobody's managing it, then it can really run away and get out of hand in a hurry.
Yeah, because there again, there's that emotional effect too. I think a lot of, we talk to a lot of sales guys, and I've even heard them say that it's like, I don't remember it looking like this when it was on the farm, and that's just the whole rose-colored glass effect. You know what I mean? It looks pretty when you're going through the process, and then you get it home and she's not as pretty as you thought.
Yep.
And that's having that as much as you can. I know it's a difficult process, but to be as unbiased in your approach as you can be. So, well, what else are you seeing out in the marketplace right now? Anything standing out to you that maybe is some trends are starting to develop?
It seems like things are picking up a little bit. It seems like there's kind of an uptrend. We've had a lot of sales happen here in the last couple weeks, internally at our stores and in the wholesale market.
Right.
And there's a lot of uncertainty with trade and everything in the ag market, but I think there's a lot of farmers that are maybe seeing the light at the end of the tunnel and making plans for their future and how they're going to move forward in the next couple years. So I think there's a lot of expansion going on too.
Right.
So there's a lot of guys that are upgrading or figuring out how they're gonna continue with what they're doing. So
yeah, kind of back on that same topic. It's like we've seen a lot of stuff come through, and a lot of guys that are upgrading their equipment. And like I've said before, I don't really think it's driven by we've got all this money, we need to spend it. Some guys have positioned themselves where they have made a little money and they're going to start kind of look around and see what's out there. But again, I think a lot of this is back to that point of I've got this large recon bill where I've been running this machine for X number of years, and it's way outside my comfort zone. Is how I want to move forward with this machine. I've used an example before of a friend of mine that was in this as another remarketing manager, and he had a customer that bought everything brand new in 2013 and has done nothing at all, means service and those kind of things, but he's not traded any of that equipment in. So it's 5 years old. And this was a yearly roll guy, every 2 years type of guy. So now he's got 5, almost 6 seasons on what he's doing. And he's thinking about, I don't feel comfortable having this many hours on my stuff, so I'm gonna flip it out of it. That's, in my opinion, is why the late and low hour stuff, especially at these auctions. You watch these auctions all the time, like all of us do. And these retirement sales are just crazy, And I think a lot of it is because they can they can kind of picture what the guy that owned it beforehand.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? They get a good feel by seeing it sitting on his farm and what his farm looks like. And you know, if his farm looked like a tornado went through it, they probably would have some reservations on it. But when it's, you know, very precisely manicured rocks on his driveway going in, and there's no dirt on the floor in the shop and those kind of stuff, that gives someone the impression that, hey, this machine was really taken care of. It's really good. And most of that stuff are the neighbors right around there that
Mm-hmm.
are that are really pushing that thing forward. And I think that there's probably a large amount of pride too that comes from that. That, you know, I'm a local guy and I bought this piece of equipment. Now, all that being said, some of the prices that are coming through, I have to question why they spent that much money on it. But it's what they wanted, you know. And a lot of these guys too, like some of these 70 series combines I watch sell.
Mm-hmm.
You know, why would you spend $180,000 on a 70 series combine? No, maybe the guy didn't want the def, or didn't want this, that, or the other thing, or whatever it was. And I can't hardly wrap my head around, because that wasn't that far from what would have cost me. I mean,
Yep.
another $20,000-$30,000 at that time frame probably made it pretty close to what a new one was, right around there. So
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't get it, but
Yeah, I agree. There's some crazy stuff going on right now in the market, and none of it seems to all completely make sense or have a definite rhyme or reason.
yeah, absolutely. So, all right, Gina. Well, I think we've covered it for this one here. So, if guys and gals want to find you out on Instagram and continue this great conversation of reconditioning, where would they find you at?
Yep, I'm on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook. Regina Narjes. You should be able to find me pretty easily.
All right, and then you can find me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Moving Iron LLC. You can also check out the Moving Iron Podcast YouTube channel, and you can also go to Moving Iron LLC to get past and present episodes of Moving Iron Podcast. Check out the Moving Iron blog, and you can also get information about the 2018 Moving Iron Summit in Las Vegas, October 2nd through the 4th. If you want to find the podcast, you can find it on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher Radio, TuneIn Radio, and SoundCloud. So until next time, I'm Casey Seymour.
Regina Narjes.
Let's go move some iron. Out.